So welcome everybody to tonight's lecture on the Idylls of the King, juxtaposed against Mallory's original stories about the King Arthur legend. It's a great series so far with our friend Mark Schenker. Tonight's idyll, I think, is a very interesting point in the progression through the Idylls, and Mark's going to have a lot to say about that. On that note, he's got a lot to say. So how we're going to run this tonight is he's going to take a short break around the midpoint, not 20 or so minutes, but more like around the midpoint. And he will love to have questions, but we want them to be at that point just questions about something that you didn't understand or wasn't clear from the first half, because there's a lot to cover. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark and we'll get started.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for that clarification, and also thank you for letting me do this. I will tell you all, this is my third of 6 lectures. This is the 9th of 12 Idylls. When I tell people at Yale or colleagues of mine elsewhere or other librarians that Wilton is letting me do, that's how I say it, Idylls of the King, they're stunned, both that the library is happy to do that and that you people are showing up. So thank you. So Peleus and Attar takes a sharp turn in the trajectory towards the fall of Camelot and the death of Arthur. The Holy Grail that we did last time was filled with wasteland motifs. The knights had abdicated their responsibility. Sin had broken out. Arthur was not happy. And the idyll ends with Percival, who's telling this story to a fellow monk, saying, "The king said this, but I didn't understand everything he meant." So that's not a good sign for the idyll to end that way. And the next one opens up with the idea that the king has to fill in the gaps. This is the opening of Peleus and Attar, because he's lost knights to the Grail, to the quest. Another very bad sign that it begins with filling the gaps. If the entire saga begins with the populating the Knights of the Round Table, it's a bad sign that reparations have to be done. So in the 5th and 6th idyll, we saw Balin. We didn't see, but if you were to read them, Balin and Balan and Mark and Vivian, and then even darker in Lancelot and Elaine and the last tournament, that the infidelity of Guinevere as a queen and of Lancelot as a knight continues to corrupt everything. The queen's guilty love for Lancelot, which we first heard of, if you were to read all 12 idylls, in the 3rd idyll. It's responsible for the return of Balin's madness when he hears that Guinevere, who he's become devoted to in a courtly love way, he removes her crown from his shield when he wants to disown her. And when he no longer has that shield, his own brother can't recognize him. And so Guinevere's unfaithfulness is indirectly responsible for the death of the 2 brothers. He's an unknown knight. When we get to the 7th idyll that we've done, Lancelot and Elaine, we saw that the relationship between Guinevere and Lancelot, an open secret, is indirectly responsible for the death of Elaine, because she's in love with Lancelot. He seems to suggest that if he were free, there might be a different fate, but he's not. And he's described in contradictory language. Excuse me just a second. I'll find it in a bit. We're told that he's in that position where he has to be falsely true and truly false. That is, true to the queen, who he's having a false relationship with, and just the opposite with Elaine. When we get to the Holy Grail, where it's much wider than the relationship between Lancelot and Guinevere, we saw lots of wasteland motifs. I told you that would be an issue. The phrase "land of sand and thorns" is iterated 3 times. Sand is the land of desert. People would think of the Holy Land. Thorns, the crucifixion of Christ. The phrase falling to dust occurs 6 times in the latter half of the Holy Grail. Things are not good. When in Lancelot and Elaine, Gawain is sent on his mission by the king to return the diamond that Lancelot in disguise rejected, the king says, "Give this to the unknown knight. He won it, I want him to have it." And Gawain instead gives it to Elaine. The king is very unhappy about that disobedience. He chides, he scolds Gawain, and it's clear that Gawain does that because he's interested in pursuing Elaine. Gawain is the bad boy of Middle Ages in terms of being a knight. That he would not obey Arthur specifically shows you how bad things have come. So here's the line that I couldn't find earlier about the dilemma that Lancelot is in Lancelot and Elaine. His honor in dishonor stood, and faith unfaithful kept him falsely true. So that bind is he accepts the offer to disguise himself. In fact, it's Guinevere's suggestion. And then when she sees him having done it by wearing a lady's favor in the field, that is going farther than she had anticipated, she's angry with him. And it's that anger that gets her to reject gifts from him, to be suspicious of him. And they're part of this trajectory downward to the affair being much more broadly influential with the Holy Grail quest that Camelot is on the way down. This is a taste of what we encounter in tonight's idyll, Peleus and Attar, which is the 5th idyll with a title that joins a man and a woman in a romantic or a sexual relationship. So we had Gareth and Lynette, Geraint and Enid, that's how it's pronounced, Merlin and Vivian, who did have a sexual relationship, and now Lancelot and Elaine, and now Peleus and Attar. But Peleus and Attar are hardly a couple. The pairing of a self-deluded young knight, he's from the Styx. We're told that he comes from wasteland and he's inherited a lot of barren islands, and he's young and he's idealistic and he wants to be a knight and he wants to get a sword and he wants to win a circlet, a headband for a love that he doesn't even have yet. He winds up falling for a so-called great lady with a scornful manner and an absolutely unfeeling heart. So you realize very early on in Peleus and Attar that we have an ironic reversal of the courtly love motif. Instead of Elaine pining after the noble Lancelot, despite his other flaws, we have a knight who is new, raw, naive, idealistic, pining after a woman who's not worthy of the attention. Very dark. The mode of this idyll, the literary mode, is irony. And it's only going to become more and more ironic when we turn next time to the last tournament. So if you no longer had people doing good things, you'd say, oh, the knighthood is wearing out. But irony means they're doing the opposite of what we expect. You know, Gawain is enlisted. In fact, he volunteers to be the surrogate to go in and talk to Attar, disguise himself in, I hope you've all read this, otherwise this won't make sense, to disguise himself in Peleus's armor to get into the castle and then make his pitch for the guy's really a good guy. Instead, when he takes off his visor, she's smitten with him. Gawain, again, the bad boy of the Middle Ages, decides to sleep with the woman he was supposed to help his friend with. He is not just not knightly, he is unknightly. It's not just an absence of courtly love, it's an inversion of it. You see that constantly. Things are the opposite of what they should be. So in the second idyll, we had a happy ending where Gareth and Lynette had made merry over death, and in their household, large mirth lived. By the time we get to the ninth idyll, it's not just a tale of unhappiness, but a dark parody of the early idylls of love and valor. And here, as I said, the self-deluded lover is longing for an unattainable, but not the lily maid of Astolat, as in Lancelot and Elaine, but rather a young knight who is treated as an object of desire from a woman far removed from Elaine. So again, the dominant mood is irony, and I'll give examples of that as we go. The tale begins again with Arthur making new knights to fill the gap left by the Holy Grail. You have to feel the force of that opening, which is a kind of pathetic statement that he's filling the gaps. When do you expect a romantic epic from the Middle Ages to talk about a king having to fill the gaps? It's like saying he fell short on paying the electric bill. One of these is, as I said, Peleus, who just inherited Waste Island. There's that word again. And he's looking to win a sword for himself and a circlet for a lady he doesn't have yet. On his way to Camelot, he has a kind of waking dream. And now I'm going to ask you to screen share, Michael. I have two excerpts from this idyll so that we can look concretely at the language of the poetry. And one of the advantages that Tennyson has over Mallory, and one of the big differences is he's a lot more detailed and he's writing poetry. So this is when Peleus goes back in time a little bit. We're told he's in Camelot, and then we go back in time to his riding, nearly falling off his horse, getting tired and falling asleep. And then we're told, through the green, glooming twilight of the grove, it seemed to Peleus that the fern without burned as a living fire of emeralds, that his eyes were dazzled looking at it. That's like the Grail. It's not good for your eyes to be dazzled. You're supposed to have clear vision. Then o'er it crossed the dimness of a cloud floating, and once the shadow of a bird flying, and then a fawn, and his eyes closed. And since he loved all maidens, but no maiden special, half awake he whispered, "Where, oh where? I love thee, though I know thee not." That is, he loves the idea of love. There's nobody there yet. For fair thou art and pure as Guinevere, we all see the irony there. And I will make thee with my spear and sword, yes, do be as Freudian as you like in this story, as famous, O my queen, my Guinevere, for I will be thine Arthur when we meet. So this does not bode well. And I just want to point out, when I can grab my copy of the poem, that you see green grove, you see fern and fire and flying and floating and fawn. You see the idea that he is half awake when he whispers where. And so unlike Elaine, who meets Lancelot, and we're told when she meets him, she reads his lineaments. She reads his character in his body, in the scars on his face. They have a true encounter. This is dreamy. Itar is a version of the Holy Grail, something that is more in the eye of the beholder, in this case, this young boy looking for love and service, looking to be devoted to someone, and he has hitched his wagon to a very bad star. I just want to point out that the alliteration and the detail is something that's not in Mallory. For one thing, he's writing prose. And then if we could go down a little bit, scroll down to the second excerpt, about 190 lines in, where we're he has won the circlet. He has given it to his love, who scorns him, mocks him, and then tells the company as she rides back to her castle, keep him away from me. I cannot stand, she says, Sir Baby. You may know that girl, the word girl, is an Anglo-Saxon word that originally meant a untested boy. The word girl was used for young boys who didn't seem to be on track to become knights. And it's part of the sexism of civilization, culture, and language that when the word no longer meant a unsuccessful young knight, let's say, it was applied to females. Uh, um, he is called Sir Baby by him, another kind of irony. He comes to be a young knight. He actually wins his tournament. But why does he win his tournament? Remember, we're told that Arthur is so moved by the commitment of this knight and wants him to get the prize for his lady love that Arthur keeps the more experienced knights out of the tournament of youth. King Arthur fixes the tournament. What the heck is going on here? If you didn't get that in that passage, read it again. Arthur wants Peleus to win. So he wins a rigged victory. He gives his prize to a woman not worthy of it. And he has a sword, which is going to be important in the latter part of the story. And I don't mean symbolically. So when he's following her back to her castle, hoping that his devotion will win her over, the Atar, the great lady, tells her damsels, keep him away from me. This her damsels heard, and mindful of her small and cruel hand, they, closing round him through the journey home, acted her hest, and always from her side restrained him with all manner of device, so that he could not come to speech to her, not come to the act of speech to her. And when she gained her castle, up sprang the bridge, down rang the grate of iron through the grove, and he was left alone in open field. Now, I got to take a pause because somewhere in this little area, I have my book and I don't know what I did with it, but I'll take it. So, heard, hand, home, hest in those 4 lines. Side and device the long I, especially upsprang and down rang. That's kind of neat. Upsprang the bridge, down rang the grate of iron. The grate of iron and the groove, the long A of gained, of great. There's another long A sound that I can't find it. Restrained and gained and great. And then lastly, he was left alone in an open field. The O sound of alone and the O of open. You may not notice it as you read, especially if you're reading for plot, understandable if this is your first experience. But I want to encourage you, if you haven't been doing it, to read as much of the poem as you can out loud and slowly. Read every word that's there. It's easier to do if you read out loud. And think about what's happening here. You know, people who are not versed in the reading of poetry, people who have been turned off because they read only poems in the New Yorker, which tend to be a little elusive, or because they weren't taught poetry appropriately, I think, in their education. They have a sense that, oh, wait, this is a 10,000 line poem about Arthur and the Knights, and it's written in the 19th century. This is going to be very dreamy and airy and hard to visualize. The heart of poetry, the heart of good poetry, of most poetry, is concreteness. And one of the advantages that this little scene has over Mallory, who doesn't bother to tell us anything about the grate and the bridge, is that it gives you the detail that when she gained her castle, she's gaining something, but he won't. Up sprang the bridge, down rang the grate of iron, so he's not getting through. through the groove. Why do we have to be told that the iron goes through the groove? We know there's some kind of channel that the grate runs on. We've seen countless movies where that portcullis comes down. We could draw it if we had to, because he's a poet who's visualizing the fact that Peleus is locked out. The iron, the grate, the groove, and left all alone in the open field. If you see the power of that when it's called out to you, look for it when you read a passage that you think is particularly attractive or that you think is critical to a turn in the plot. You can get better at finding it on your own. And if you don't see any of them, go back and read a second time and they will come to you. But herd and hand and home and hest, and of course her hand is what gave the hest. This is what the damsels heard, and her journey home is a journey of isolating him. He's left and alone in an open field, far from any kind of home or kindness. So we can undo the screen share, and I'll take any questions, especially as Michael said earlier, if you have questions about what I've said so far. Again, there's a lot to cover, and as we get further into the poem, there are more things that are reverberating back through the Idylls we've already read and some of those you haven't read. So I'm happy to take a question, or if there are none, move on.
Okay, folks, so you can use the Q&A box to send that to me, and I'll relay it to Mark. In the meantime, Mark, it's not a question about what you said, it's an idea about how I approach this today, for example, and see what you think about it as a suggestion. You talk about the audible aspects of this poem as opposed to just knowing the plot. You could read a brief synopsis of this so you kind of know what goes on, and then listen to the whole thing from LibriVox. Today's Idyll was about 32 minutes long, and I didn't know anything about this before I'd read it. I looked up a brief synopsis, so I had the general idea of the plot line, and then I just hit the play button on LibriVox.
Thank you for repeating that suggestion. I'm glad you're reminding people of that. Remember, I said in our first meeting that Tennyson is using the Idylls of the King in a cautionary way. The 19th century in England was a time of great progress. England was at the top of its empire. The sun never sets on the British Empire. Mid-century, they had a great exhibition of different inventions and products that were made. When the railroad came into being in the 30s and 40s, it was seen as a emblem of the idea that we could now do anything. Tennyson has a poem in which he extols the railroad as the great world moving down the ringing grooves of change. And he had understood that the wheels ran in grooves on the track. In fact, train wheels are just the opposite. The groove is in the wheel, the track is solid. But there was a great excitement that we were the best that civilization had to offer. And his poem made a point about white English civilization is better than Indian or Asian civilization. At the same time, he lived long enough to start to have misgivings about what was happening to the democratization of England and the idea that people who were non-gentry, men, who's the only people they polled, who had no lineage, no property, maybe they were working class, maybe they were merchant class, maybe they were well-to-do through inheritance, but not lords themselves. Remember, Alfred Lord Tennyson is a baron. Every one of these sirs is a lord. The sir is not just a minor title, they are made lords of the kingdom. And Tennyson was enough of an aristocrat, very different from somebody like Dickens, that he lamented the fact that the democratization of England left people without the breeding, without the background, without the knowledge of knowing what value is. And so I think I mentioned that first lecture. If you say to somebody, you can vote for whomever you want, the question of some of the Victorians, Matthew Arnold, Tennyson, Ruskin, is who's going to teach them what they should want? Who should teach them what they should want? The heart of fascism, which will rear its head the next century, is that the people don't know what they want. So you need a strong leader to bind them together like twigs. That's where fascism comes from. Fasces is the Italian word for twig. And you need that leader to tell them, we need a lot of you to do things that I can't do alone, but I'm the one who's going to tell you what it is you want. And so this is moving towards the idea that this dream of Arthur was flawed. He aimed too high. He was inattentive to his own and his kingdom's shortcomings. Maybe he was mistaken to try to make a better civilization that could be had. But the sin of several kinds is something that can't go away. So if there's not another question, if you're not waiting for one, Michael, I'll go on.
I have a quick answer to a question that I'll give, and then there's one question which you can, if you want to take it. The question that I got from someone, Janice, but I'll tell everybody. She was asking, how do we find LibriVox? Where do we hear it? LibriVox is LibriVox, and the website is LibriVox.org. And if you go to a Google search engine and just put in LibriVox space Idylls, it ought to be the first thing you see. And then when you click on it, it shows you all the Idylls that are listed there. You pick the one you want, and you hit the play button. The question that was asked is, she is puzzled by line 126 that says, quote, and straightly nipped the hand and flung it from her.
I'm sorry to say that I honestly do not know what I did with my volume, and I have a good memory, but not that good. If the questioner can ask that of me online later, I'll be happy to answer it. I'm going to have to take a pass now. Sorry.
As you know, folks, Mark's very, very happy to answer questions that you can email him. And if you don't have his email address, just ask me. I'll give it right to you.
I'd be even happier to find my book. Anyway, so to continue, we're told that Itar has large eyes that are the haunts of scorn. Scorn's a very powerful word. This is not La Belle Dame sans Merci. Keats wrote a poem with that title. Another motif in the Middle Ages about a kind of ice-cold woman who doesn't give any love back to a devoted admirer. That's the absence of affection or connection. But scorn is quite different. And she immediately mocks him for being from the wilds of the woods. This is line 95 or so, and believes him incapable of speech. In fact, he's so taken with her beauty that he can't get his bearings. And she only tolerates him in the hope that he can win the prize for her, which of course he does. As I said, the tournament of youth is proclaimed by Arthur. He puts the fix in, quite remarkable that he holds back the older knights. When Itar takes the circlet and passes Guinevere, and Guinevere says, why were you so cold to your champion? And the champion is field. Champs-Élysées is the Elysian field. A campaign, same word, champ, is you're out in the field, whether for military or political reasons, trying to win. And your champion is the person who is down on the field of the tournament, who won a prize for you. When Guinevere says, why aren't you nicer to him? Itar, who doesn't know Guinevere, presumably doesn't know her background or her history, she's just a wicked person, says to the queen, if Lancelot wasn't holed up in your room, maybe she's heard the rumor, Itar would not have won. So even as she's happy to have her prize, she knows that the fix was in. We're told that Guinevere pays no more attention to that comment than the bite of an ant on her foot. But still, we hear the comment. And if somebody who is nobody in the plot, Itar has no continued role in Idylls of the King, can be that mouthy, I'll use that word, it's not good. This is not good. So she rejects him. The grate comes down. She can't tolerate her baby. She mocks him. She mocks Arthur and his table. And for 3 times, she has her knights bring him in and throw him out again. In fact, it's so repetitious that it's boring, which it's meant to be. It's meant to be stagnant, that there's no progress being at all. Well, he runs into Gawain. Camelot and England's pretty big, but there's a lot of Dickensian meeting cute. And Gawain offers that he'll help his fellow knight by disguising himself, as I said, as Peleus, going in, once he's inside, making a play for what a good guy Gawain is. I'm sorry, what a good guy Peleus is. And Peleus spends 3 days, the magical 3 days, roaming around. Now, what's significant about this is he tells, Gawain tells Tar that he's killed Peleus, which wasn't the part of the original plan. She's suspicious, but when he takes off his visor, she says the medieval equivalent of hubba hubba, and Gawain has already forgotten his offer to help a fellow knight. Part of the reason things are going wrong is that he's removed his own identity and he's played at being somebody else. When Balin removes the crown of Guinevere from his shield, which is supposed to be a kind of calling card, like your coat of arms, he becomes a nobody. His nickname is the Savage. And worse, he is not recognizable to his brother, who thinks he's the beast of the field, and they kill each other. When Lancelot decides that he's going to test whether his ability is really what's being tested on the field of the tournament, or whether he's intimidating people by his resume, he decides to disguise himself as somebody else. He's not only not Lancelot, he's a knight who has another lady that he's devoted to. Those turn out to be very bad things. Not to be yourself is a bad thing. We're told in the Holy Grail that one of the things the knights who want to see the Grail must do is lose themselves to find themselves. That's not just a Christian idea. That's a Buddhist idea. That's a very has a very long history that the self is the enemy of the soul. In America, the self is extolled when the nation was formed as the idea of life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Your life, your liberty, the pursuit of your happiness. That was true for the founders. But the Puritans who founded the New England colonies before the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution were written, they believed that the self was the enemy of the soul, and that salvation was for your soul, which meant you had to lose yourself. And I want to say again, this is by no means just a Christian idea. It's just that we're talking about a Christian poem, a Christian nation, very long lineage to the idea that the way to salvation is some kind of erasure of yourself. Well, in the Holy Grail, they're talking about a spiritual, moral erasure. They're not talking about putting on new duds. And it's telling that things go awry when these men, Balin and Lancelot and Gawain, are not themselves, but instead deceive for their own purposes. It's just the opposite of losing yourself. It's pretending for the purposes of some kind of self-enhancement. Lancelot wants to know for sure whether he is as good as he thinks. Balin is disgusted by what he's heard of the queen and doesn't want to be associated with her. And of course, Gawain is looking to get into Itara's, what's the word? Bed. I know what you were thinking. So when Peleus goes in and he sees the three pavilions, three big tents, there's a number again. He sees three of the knights sleeping, drunk, with squires at their feet, people serving them. He goes in the second pavilion and sees four damsels. And then when he goes into the third pavilion, there's that rule of three, he sees Gawain and Itara in bed together. And what he does is thinks he should kill them. And he says, even he, so wronged by a fellow knight, could not bring himself to kill a knight. And so he starts to walk away. In Tennyson, it's a moment, as if he turned away from the bed and then turns back. In Malory, it's he rides for half a mile or more. That is, his indecision is made more extended. In any event, when he goes back, he decides that he's going to leave the sword across their throat. This is both in Malory and in Tennyson. The sword, of course, is the knightly sword he won at the fixed tournament. So it's not only corrupted by the fact that he won it in a fixed tournament, he won it in order to get that headband for Itara, who's wearing it in bed. So when Itara leaves the bed, both the sword that he has won, which is his object, and the circlet, which he has won, which is her object, are in the bed together. She wakes up feeling the cold steel. She learns that Peleus is not dead. She sees Gawain as what he is, a deceiver. And she thinks, gee, maybe this Peleus is worth another look. It's to Tennyson's credit that he completely eviscerates her as someone without any kind of morality whatsoever. Well, you didn't kill him, and he came and he made this kind of neat move of putting the sword across our throats. And I hope you remember that in the text, she thinks maybe she's sweet on him again. Now, in the Middle Ages, it was a meme that a sword would be placed between two people, male and female, in a bed, who either by their own decision or by some outside enforcement could not have sexual relations. So the sword was placed between them, the way that one or more of you may have had the experience growing up, I don't want confessionals, of putting a bolster or a rolled up comforter between you in bed with someone who you needed to sleep with for whatever reason, but couldn't sleep with, so to speak. This idea that the sword that he would have used to kill them if he were less honorable becomes a reminder that he could have, and that he leaves the sword behind is important because now he runs into, as happens, Percival. Turns out that Itara's castle is not far from where our friend Percival is in the abbey. And Percival tells him about the queen, comes up in conversation, and Peleus, who's just gotten used to the idea that Gawain is not the knight he's supposed to be, has now encounters that Guinevere is not the queen he's supposed to be. Remember, in his half dream, he's hoping to find his queen, his Guinevere. And it turns out Guinevere is rotten, corrupted. And he says in his amazement, and the king? And Percival says, the king? Well, let men couple with wolves. That is, you've gone too far to suggest the king could be corrupt. If that were to happen, let men coupled with wolves. Well, that bestiality image turns out to be prescient because you may have noticed that there are lots of references to dogs, that Peleus is kept outside the castle waiting like a dog. And when he goes into the third pavilion, you have to think of it as a grand tent, and puts his hand in. It's like someone putting their hand into a nest and finding a snake. I hope you remember that image. And there are references to rats and other kinds of animals, especially the snake. And when he runs into Lancelot, who wants to know why he's riding so recklessly, Peleus will not give his name. And when he's asked his name, he says, I have no name. I have many names. And then he gives a list of vices. Well, you may know that when the question is put to a man in the New Testament possessed of a demon, that is of Satan, when Jesus asks, what is your name? His response is, my name is Legion, capital L. I hope you've heard that quote somewhere before. That is, my name is multitude. Odysseus says that he has no name because he wants to trick the Cyclops, Polyphemus, into saying, I was hurt by no one, the guy called no one. And people think that if he was hurt by no one, he was hurt by the gods, and they leave him alone. They avoid him. But Peleus says, my name is everything. Every kind of shame is what I am, because he has lost his idealism and gone in the opposite direction, and he's going to become demonic, quoting Satan from the New Testament. And when Lancelot says, I'll fight you, and Peleus basically asks for suicide by night, I have no sword, slay me, kill me, I don't want to live. Lancelot defeats him in the battle, and we're told, and you can look at the closing, maybe the 2 or 3 pages back from the end. Lancelot defeats him and has his foot on the head of Peleus, who's on the ground. I hope you can find that if what I'm about to say interests you. Well, in Christian and especially Catholic iconography, Saint Michael, the archangel, the warrior angel, Gabriel is the announcer. Michael is the person who kicks people out of Eden. Gabriel tells you you're going to give birth to the Son of God. Very different jobs. Michael is depicted in knight-like armor and has his foot on the head of Satan, ready to crush it. He has a spear in his arm. So the poem figures Peleus, who has now identified himself in his language as the devil. And you can be assured that any literate person in the 19th century reading this poem will catch the reference to my name is Legion. When I teach my undergraduates, they're doubtful because they don't realize the hegemony of Christianity, and especially the King James Version of the Bible, to 19th century English readers. And this includes illiterate people who are church attendees, because once a year, you will hear the Bible reading. I hear it once a year, where the demon in the desert says, my name is Legion. I am multitudes. And so they would see that Peleus's fall from his naive, idealistic desire to be a great knight who gets there by being in a rigged tournament, not his fault, falls in love with a woman who's completely heartless, enlists the help of a friend who's not a friend, and then leaves the sword that he won behind. I don't think he forgot it. He doesn't want it any more than he wants the circlet and the woman. But it means that when he goes into, oh my Lord, Michael, I'm going to ask you to look for other questions, because I fear that if I don't find my book, I'm going to be out of luck.
Well, I have it.
I have it. I'm going to ask you to hold off for a second. I'm
Okay.
sorry. I was vamping. Some do poorly. So think of the snake imagery in the poem, the animal imagery in the poem, the idea that if Arthur were corrupt, men should couple with beasts. We told earlier in the poem, not this poem, in an earlier idyll, that in the great hall of Camelot, there are sculptures depicting the four zones of civilization. In the first, beasts are killing men. In the second, men are killing beasts. In the third, men are creating laws in society. And in the fourth, they're sprouting wings. They're becoming ethereal and spiritual. Tennyson would say that's the overreach. Stop at zone 3 and don't think that you're capable of being perfect. The perfect is the enemy of the good. So, okay, so now Lancelot has been defeated. He has said, I'm sorry, Lancelot has defeated Peleus. And on the break in the text around line 570, Lancelot says, "Rise, weakling, I am Lancelot, say thy say." And then there's a break, and now they're writing back. Well, that break is when Lancelot tells him the whole sordid mess. Peleus and Lancelot have a come to Guinevere moment here, and the jig is up. And Lancelot slowly rode his war horse back to Camelot, and Sir Peleus in brief while caught his unbroken limbs from the dark field and followed to the city. It chanced that both break into hall together, worn and pale, there with her knights and dames was Guinevere. Full wonderingly, she gazed on Lancelot. Gazed is a word that appears quite often in this poem. It's used the same way it's used in James Joyce's Dubliners. It's looking without processing. You gaze in a daydream, you gaze in wonder. Gazing is not studying, understanding. It's not reading the way Elaine reads the character of Lancelot. It's spectating. On Lancelot so soon returned, and then on Peleus, him who had not greeted her, no surprise, but cast himself down on a bench, hard breathing. "Have ye fought?" she asked of Lancelot. "Aye, my queen," he said. "And thou hast overthrown him?" "Aye, my queen." Lancelot's taking no joy in this report because he's just heard the whole story from Peleus. "And thou, aye, my queen." Then she, turning to Peleus, "O young knight, hath the great heart of knighthood in thee failed so far thou canst not abide unforwardly, that is, without perversity, oddly, a fall from him?" Just the wrong thing. She thinks the reason that the young knight is so upset that he's lost to Lancelot, who, remember, was withheld from the tournament that he won. A fall from him? This is the last thing that Peleus needs to hear, and the last person he needs to hear it from. Then, for he answered not, "Or hast thou other griefs? If I, the queen, may help them, loose thy tongue and let me know." Talk about oil on the fire. But Peleus lifted it up, and eyes so fierce she quailed. And he, hissing, "I have no sword." Think about that. Hissing like a snake, "I have no sword. I have no male potency. I have no weapon. I don't have the knightly prize that I won in a fixed match." And he sprang from the door into the dark, sprang into the dark like an animal. And we're going to find out that he becomes the Red Knight who sets up his kingdom in the north, which is a reference to Satan and the Bible. We'll talk about that when we get to the last tournament, which is my favorite idyll of the collection. But that "I have no sword." It in Heart of Darkness, Kurtz's last words are, in this whispered kind of desperation. It's not a declaration. It's a confession. It's a lament. It's an agony. We're not sure he knows what he's referring to, but the quality of the expression in Conrad is nerve-wracking, like "I have no sword." The queen looked hard upon her lover. She's not gazing now, he on her, and each foresaw the dolorous day to be. Dolor is pain, a painful day to be. Talk died, and here's a simile, as in a grove, all song beneath the shadow of some bird of prey. All the birds go quiet in a grove when the shadow of a murderous bird hangs over them. Then a long silence came upon the hall, and Modred thought, the time is hard at hand. Modred is the anti-Arthur. He has different backstories depending which version you read, but he is essentially the anti-Arthur. And he's just waiting for a time when weakness can be showed in Camelot, and now he knows it's close. And the last tournament is going to be the last whimper. It's a brilliant idyll and introduces the Tristram and Iseult, a myth, the Mark of Cornwall, two different queens, Iseult, to add to the confusion. We'll talk about that. If you've already begun to read it, you see it begins with a mocking of the round table. The time for the dissolution of the kingdom is hard at hand. And when Lancelot and Guinevere look at each other and realize that the jig is up and that they're responsible, it's a very, very dark time in the poem. So we have a few more minutes. I did want to cover all that. Remember, you lose your identity in a trivial way by changing costumes. Havoc follows. You have to try to cultivate a change in your nature. Percival has the right idea, at least, in quitting the field and going to the abbey to try to at least be contemplative. Gawain is just the opposite of that. So, Michael, if there are questions or points. The woman who asked the question earlier, now I have my text. Could we find that again and you tell me the line?
Yep, and then I have just a general question after this one. So that one from before was, I am puzzled by line 126, quote, and straightly nipped the hand and flung it from her.
Yes. So she's been mocking him with the circlet that I may love thee. Then his helpless heart leapt and he cried, and wilt thou if I win? Remember, he hasn't won yet. They're on the way there. Aye, that I will, she answered, and she laughed, and then immediately, straightly, right away, nipped the hand. Now, I think it probably means smacked at it. I don't think she bit his hand, but I wouldn't put it past her, and flung it from her. That is, she's being, so many words are sexist when they're negative about women, but she's toying with him. Look at mine, but wilt thou see? Look at my hand. Wilt thou fight for me and win me this fine circlet, purely that I may love thee? She's completely toying with him, and that's where his helpless heart leapt, and wilt thou if I do this? So she's casting his hand away from hers after she nips it. And again, I think that's most likely she sort of smacks it. She goes to take his hand, which of course is a gesture of affection and connection, and then smacks it away. She's an example of the irony. If she ignored him, if she played hard to get and was quiet, it would be one thing. But she encourages him and then mocks him or scorns him. It's very, very dark, especially when you realize the culture is dependent on people playing by the rules. You want this thing, you have to give at least your affection, if not your eternal love, to the knight who's going to win it for you. I hope that's helpful to whoever asked that question.
So then we had a question in the middle that asked if you could possibly do it maybe at the end. It's a general question. Could you address the general question about the portrayal of women in the poem, conniving, naive, etc.? And it kind of riffs off of what you were just saying a couple minutes ago.
Yeah. So this is a very complicated question. and partly because it may transcend my knowledge, I can tell you this. The introduction of Guinevere to the poem is a late addition to Malory's work. The Idylls of the King were mainly about knights errant and Merlin and Camelot and Excalibur, and it was a kind of masculine story, kind of adventure story. And again, it was meant to consecrate this historical, mythical figure of Arthur as someone who drove the Anglo-Saxons out of Britain. And so it's not interested in women. And it's not a Hollywood movie where you have to put Rhonda Fleming in to get the women to come, even though it's a war or a Western. It's only later when the French troubadours in the 14th century wrote romances about Arthurian legends, and they were interested in love, courtly love, and the role of females. And so that was a kind of late addition. As a result, there's a kind of cacophony in some of the many stories about Arthur about whether it's an adventure story or a love story. Romance, in this sense, the French romances of Chrétien de Troyes, his name, I think, is in either the blurb that's on the website or one of the things I handed out to you. That romance is not about love. A romance, in this sense, means something unrealistic, something otherworldly or stylized. And so people like Malory were not paying much attention to women and romance. They were much more interested in the knights, the valor, the adventure, the state of the kingdom. I will say that the Middle Ages does not do a good job, of course, with women in this poem or elsewhere. Tennyson probably is better with women than the legends are, I mean, in his poetry generally. When the Holy Roman Empire is still infused with Roman Catholic thought, and the idea was that the only way a woman could be the mother of God is that she had to be conceived without sin. That's the Immaculate Conception, about her being born without sin. She couldn't be normal, and that she couldn't have a baby in the usual way, the usual sexual way, because she was given birth to God. So God is going to be a human being, but only to a point. The deck is loaded against sexuality, femaleness. You've all heard the Madonna and the whore, that witches are female because men don't know what to do with the erotic power of women. None of this is going to change that. We will, the person who asked that question, I'm going to invite you to bring it up again when we get to the penultimate idyll, 2 sessions from now, when we see what happened with Guinevere in Tennyson's poem. You should know that in some cases, she goes to a nunnery. In some cases, she's going to be executed and she's saved by Lancelot, and they live happily ever after. In some cases, we know what happened to Guinevere, and there's nothing more said about Lancelot. This is a problem with myth. It's so sloppy.
So I got one more, Mark. Liz is saying and then asking, at the end of this idyll, I wrote just one word, disillusionment. This is what happened to Peleus in a painful way. But I think I'm missing something if he becomes the Red Knight, aka Satan.
So, it is more than disillusion. Who's asking this? Liz?
Yeah, Liz.
Yeah. Liz, it's much more than disillusionment. He comes so eager to be a knight, and there is a psychological truth that somebody who has their heart set on something good, when they find out that it's not good, it can turn them. I mean, quite literally, psychologically. If this is not good, then nothing's good. This is Peleus's, well, you mean even the king? And Percival says, well, no, not the king. Well, why not the king? Guinevere is corrupt. And so he becomes an anti-Arthur in the same way that Satan becomes a kind of anti-God, that he uses his power, Satan, he's a fallen angel, to do the opposite of good because he's so disillusioned with being a servant. Better to reign in hell, he says, than serve in heaven, he says in Paradise Lost. And his name is Legion. You know the word pandemonium. Milton invented that word to talk about the devils, the angels that fell with Lucifer, setting up not a pantheon, which means all the gods, theos, but a pandemonon, all devils. And there is lots of precedent in literature and life for a person who is so broken in their disappointment about what they thought was good, that they go over to the dark side. It's certainly a meme in lots of literature and movies. Star Wars is, the Red Knight is Darth Vader, whose name I think is a play on Death Father. Anyway, very, very, very dark. And I always hear that line, I have no sword. It's one of the great examples of a snippet of dialogue at the end of a long idyll that is hard to forget. Okay, we're over time. Again, read out loud if you can. I'm glad for Michael's suggestion about the way that you can access it so you can hear it. I hope you're finding this is doing what you want it to do. I really do hope that that's the case, and that you'll come back in 2 weeks. I will say I myself find it hard to wait 2 weeks to talk to you again because I'm having so much fun reading this and talking to you about it.
Well, I'm having a lot of fun too, Mark, and I'm liking the progression. It's really very interesting, and looking forward to the next one in 2 weeks. We'll see all you folks there. And as I said, there weren't any unanswered questions, but if you have any questions coming up in your mind after this, Mark is always very happy to take care of those.
Yes, and let me say, I do better with questions that have a role for me to play than people who share comments, which I don't mind seeing, but I often don't know what to do with. Someone who sees something in the poem, I'm happy to hear it, but I may not necessarily engage by offering my own opinion of what you see. Partly it's a matter of time, and partly it's because I'm offering myself to answer questions the way I would if this were a class that you were talking to me in the room. So have a good night, everybody. Spring is on its way. And use the extra day this month well.
Right. All right. Great. Thanks, Mark, as usual. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you, Michael.